Today we're joined by Reverend Dejanaba Sylvia Bradshaw Akita. She talked to us today about hope. She talked to us about how we preserve and multiply hope. Welcome, Reverend Dejanaba. As a way of background, Reverend Bishop Akita is a product of the Detroit Public Schools. She moved on to the University of Michigan.
Go Blue.
Go Blue, stay black. She also ultimately got her degree out of the AU Center and immersed herself into becoming an educator. She spent many years teaching not only children within what we would consider the traditional Black community, but as a bilingual educator. She spent her time working throughout the communities of color, creating for children a safe space where they could grow and learn and hold on to their hope. Reverend Bishop, actually she's Bishop, she's our executive pastor at Shrines of the Black Madonna Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church in Houston, Texas. What made you decide that in the month of Advent, when we're looking on hope, to take the approach not of hope from the abstract, but hope that came from a man who, well, he had some doubt.
Absolutely. You know, I think that thank you for bringing that question up. When I think about the Song of Zechariah, you know, normally we hear about the Magnificat, the testimony of Mary, and we hear about the pronouncement by Elizabeth that is given to Mary when they meet and have this discussion about their upcoming births. But I thought it was interesting that we think about Zechariah, who was a part of the African nation Israel's belief in the divine intervention of God in their lives. You know, it wasn't just one or two people who believed it, but this was their tradition based on their covenant faith. They believed that God had made a covenant with their patriarch, Abraham, the first Black patriarch, and that God was going to break into history and bring about salvation for the people through them. God was not just going to do it for them, but God was going to do it through them. But even in the light of this belief, the present circumstance that he found himself in made it seem like, is it really going to happen? You know, it kind of reminds me of when I was a little girl and somebody said, well, you can wish upon a star and it'll come true. And I can remember day after day at night sitting on my front porch in Detroit when we could still see the stars in the sky and saying, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are. And I would make this wish. And every day I would hope that, is it going to come true? Is it going to come true? And it didn't come true at the time, but eventually I began to realize that hope was something that allowed you to believe that you could make something possible, even if it wasn't possible at that moment. And
so,
for Zechariah,
I heard something in that. I want to just stop you for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Bishop, you said you can make something, meaning that there's a participatory element in this.
Exactly. Yeah, because hope does not rise just from the thought. You have to make it happen. You have to help create those circumstances to bring it into fruition. And for Israel, they believed that they had to prepare themselves for this incoming of God's power, that they couldn't just be anyway. They had to have faith. They had to engage in certain practices. They had to treat each other in a certain kind of way. They had to, you know, to carry themselves in a way that it was possible for God's intervention to take place. So it meant that they had to do something. It wasn't just blind belief that it was going to happen in spite of what they did. And I think sometimes we believe that too.
Sometimes, and then we say, that's too good to be true. Zacharias was sitting there one day. He was doing his job. He was being the good uncle in the neighborhood, right? He was going to work. He was taking care of his family. He was following the traditions. And he was constantly telling people, this is going to happen. But then an angel shows up and he's like, well, I know they're angels, but not really in my house, right?
Right.
And so the angel says, you don't really believe me. So maybe you just need to be still for a while and watch it happen. Is there any significance to the fact that he was struck mute?
Well, at some point you have to kind of take a moment and realize that you can't get caught up into the chaos or the confusion that's around you, but you have to recognize the power that's within you. And mute means that you have to stop yourself, give yourself that opportunity. I think I talked about that when I first became an educator, and I was, so excited about my first day in the classroom, and I had this master plan set out, and had all these plans, and I had written everything out, and I was, oh yeah, this is going to be great. And I got in front of the students, and I did my spiel, and I was like, whoo, wonder what time it is. And only 10 minutes had went by. I had nothing else, and I was like, oh my God, what happened? And I had to kind of stop and take notice that I needed some support. I needed some other things, and I had to kind of reassess what my belief was and understand what it would take in order to make things happen. Because sometimes we can get so caught up in the moment that we don't realize it's a programmatic struggle. You have to have a programmatic approach. You just can't just bust out and make things happen instantaneously without effort, without work, without sacrifice.
So I want to imagine that we're having a conversation with a young brother or a maturer brother who has been given word that something could happen that's kind of exciting, right? And the instinct is to call my boys and talk to them. And the challenge is, and I think you pointed that out, your boys aren't on the same page as you necessarily. So if you started to talk, because communication is our natural thing, right? So I started to talk to the people in the neighborhood committee immediately. What's going to happen?
Well, if people are not at the same point you are, first of all, they're going to think that something's wrong with you. Like, why are you so upbeat? Why are you so optimistic? What is it that makes you think that you can do what other people haven't done? Why is this power coming to you if they're not at the same state or stage? How you talk about stages of faith and development. And so you have to recognize that everybody's not going to necessarily be at the same point that you are at the same time, but you can still come to some agreement to come together once you reach that synergy with other people.
So the people with a little bit of hope need to talk to the other people with a little bit of hope to support each other, right?
Yeah, and it builds from experiences. It builds from the experiences that you share with each other. Because as it's kind of like decorating a Christmas tree. When you first get this tree, it's just an empty tree. And you have an idea that, we can add some things to it. And somebody may put, some ribbon on it. Somebody else may want to put some tinsel on it. Somebody else may want to put, lights on it. And as each person adds their particular ornament or their particular element to it, it develops into something that the person who originally started may not have even conceived that it could be. But once everybody puts their parts in and you stand back and say, wow, this is something that really has come into being, who would have believed that we could do this?
So Zacharias, you let us meet a brother who had been long faithful, right? And who had been long in a good relationship with his partner. And he's given an unexpected gift, but he's a human who's lived in his world. And he knows that in the regular world, He's old, she's old. Old people don't have babies. And so he asked a question. And I'm wondering, relative to his relationship with Elizabeth, was there maybe a reason where he was kept quiet so he didn't make her crazy?
Well, I think that sometimes, we can, when we go through different experiences, we can have an adverse effect on other people because of our overzealousness, or we're not at the state where, we where we can communicate on the same page. I know in any kind of relationship, the partners will don't necessarily stay at the same place at the same time. They don't arrive at the same point. You eventually get there, but you don't always start off at the same point. And for those of us, who've gone through that childbearing state, you're not always in the best of moods when people come up and have conversation with you. They talk about the different balances and your hormones and whatnot. So, but I think that Elizabeth, from what we gathered from her, she had accepted the fact that she was with child, and she looked at it as being miraculous. That's what she told in her conversation with Mary. God has blessed me. I'm with child also, even though you come here telling me about your child is coming. And so Zechariah had to come to that point, like, how is it possible for me? Not how is it possible at all, but how is it possible for us? Things like this can happen, miracles can happen, but do miracles happen to people like me? And I think that was a big thing, that we recognize miracles when they happen to other people, but sometimes we don't recognize the miracles that happen in our own lives. And sometimes it takes other people to point out that was miraculous. That's not something that ordinarily happens.
So the way in which we live our hope, make hope a verb, hoping, yes. Hopeful, all that is different for different people, right?
It is. It is, because sometimes people think hope is something that just comes because of a desire. You gotta have hope, as if it means it's an adjective. I'm a hopeful person. And so that means good things are going to happen to me because I have hope. But hope is actually something that is driven by your actions, the things that you do. You act out of that because you are hopeful. It drives you to act. You become an active participant in making that hope become realized.
And sometimes in our life, we just have to be still and let the experience sink in.
Well, I think when I talked about the whole thing about reflection, when I said he had to reflect, when things are happening and you don't understand it, rather than dismissing it, because sometimes we dismiss things. You remember the story about Moses, the burning bush, when he saw the burning bush, and it says he turned aside to see. Sometimes we get these signs and wonders, but we don't pay attention to them. We just dismiss them. And something has to get our attention where we say, wait a minute, this is not necessarily a fluke. This is something that's actually happening. This is something that I can actually do. I can make a difference in this way. Who would have told me that, when my, as a young child, I had an uncle that was, I would, to me, if I had to describe him in the story now, I would call him the angel of God. Because he started talking to me when I was not even old enough to know what he was saying. And he would whisper different things in my head, like, you're an African queen and you can wear your hair with straws in it and you can do different things. And, he taught my older brother and myself how to speak Spanish when we were, toddlers, but he had all these different things. And he, at one point he brought this box of vocabulary words, and it was a box like 5,000 vocabulary words with the word on the front and the definition on the back. And I remember he came and he set it on the table and he pulled out a word, fortuitous. He said, what does that mean? I was like, I don't know. He said, when I come, I'm going to pour a word out and I need you to know what those words mean. I said, but how would I possibly know which word you're going to pick? He said, that's the point.
Mhm.
You know, but eventually when I was able to win admittance into the University of Michigan, people were astounded sometimes when they said, you are so articulate. How did you, what school did you go to? But a lot of that had to do with the preparation that he put into me as a young child, to say, these are the things you do on your own. You don't wait to get it at school, but you have to work on this yourself.
Mhm. So Zacharias was a community elder, and people had seen him moving along, and they'd seen Elizabeth moving along, and they appreciated that. And he was surprised to be given an extraordinary gift, so surprised that he just didn't know how to fully accept it. At the end of your sermon, you talk about his song. So when we get a gift, what should we do about that gift? Should we hide it? When that kid who kept failing geometry gets a B or a C, when the spouse who couldn't figure out how to close the toilet down after he went, when the next door neighbor actually shovels a portion of our steps that we couldn't get to, when somebody just walks by you at the end of a bad day and your feet hurt and tells you, Queen, you are beautiful, what are we supposed to do with that?
You have to share that gift. You just don't keep it to yourself. You give it to, you share it, and you pay it forward. I think hope is something to be shared and transmitted from generation to generation. And the things that we do, you give hope to people by the things that you do. Certain things happen, and it creates hope in you, to the point that you want to make sure that I want to keep this going. I don't want it to stop here. Hope is not something that you keep to yourself, but it's something that's shared and that you experience as a community.
Mm-hmm. So is hope contagious?
Oh, absolutely. It can be spread. It's it's kind of, and I think I found that was one of the rewarding things I found about teaching children. You would get in there, and especially in the later years when I began to teach kindergarten children, and it was amazing how different educators will say, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't teach those children. I couldn't, you find this niche but it was like the kindergartners, they just love you to death. And
Mm-hmm.
it's they're wide open. And it's like, if you tell them, guess what? We're getting ready to do something great. They're like, really? Oh wow. I'm ready. And you see that hope rising up in them, that the expectation that something good is going to happen. And they pass it on, to people around, and it becomes, like you said, it is a contagious ability. And it's something that we need to do, especially in light of today's society, where there is a great need for hopeful attitudes and hopeful
Yeah.
actions.
So it's Advent, it's the season of expectation. Our intentions and our expectations form our reception and our ability to move forward. We are so happy that those of you who listened to Bishop DeGeneva's presentation on Advent and hope, and the story of Zacharias, a seasoned brother who got a surprise bonus. He just thought that being faithful was what he was supposed to do, but he got a gift, and he was stunned by that gift. And once he fully received it, knew how to share it and pass it on. Not a generational curse, but a generational legacy of hope. We at the Shrines of the Black Madonna are so happy you shared these moments with us. And we ask you to share our hope. Join us if you're in Atlanta. Houston or Detroit or South Carolina, in person. Join us always online at Shrine Online, and join us in our hope for Black people, because that's what we've got, and it's an action verb. Bishop, what would you leave us with today?
I would like to leave us with that line from Maya Angelou that I just so love in her poem. Just like moons and like suns with certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise.
Amen. Ashe. Enjoy the Advent season, my brothers and sisters. The Shrines of the Black Madonna is your church. Join us whenever you can.